So, Sujata, what IEMs are you actually using for this interview?
Yeah, so currently I am using my favorite IEMs that I own at this point, which is the Manger T2. And it's really interesting because it's not the most expensive IEM I own, but it just plays my library so well that it's my go-to one for traveling, for when I just want to like relax, when I'm walking. So it's something that I'd say is very special to anyone in the audiophile community is finding their perfect sound signature. And to me, this has like done the closest to that.
I purchased the original Mangered T. I don't know, maybe it was, do you remember how long ago that came out? Like 4 or 5 years ago?
It was definitely before I even joined the
Yeah.
audiophile community.
I bought it and I loved the way it sounded, but I just couldn't get it to fit in my ears. It had this really long nozzle and they just kept falling out. I don't know, but it was definitely a really, really well-tuned set. How did you pick the Manger T2?
Yeah, so it initially started, I think, as many like audiophiles' journey of trying the more cheaper budget sets to figure out, okay, which sound signature do you like more? And I started learning that I am treble sensitive. And so a lot of the bright leaning IEMs, I tend not to like as much. And also the genre of music that I like is typically more vocal focused. And so I read a bunch of reviews online and I found that this being a good, like, kind of mid-budget option in the kind of recommendations within the community. And so I literally just blind bought it, didn't even try it before. And it turned out to be like one of like the best ones that I've ended up owning.
It's funny how it's really a thing with, I'd say, probably almost everyone who gets into this hobby. There's so many choices, and there's so many choices at the sub $100 level. It seems pretty common for people to buy, I'll see on Reddit, like people have these cases that have like a dozen or 20 IEMs, but they're all, really inexpensive IEMs. And I think it's probably a fun way to kind of decide what sound signature you like or don't like. Tell me a little bit about your journey into IEMs and that, initial, your first purchases.
Yeah, so it actually started, I guess you could even take it all the way back into high school where I think many people had like the AirPods kind of earphones that kind of came in with their iPhone or whatnot. And then I think it evolved more into kind of getting the AirPods Pro. I think that was for a lot of people where they started seeing like, wow, the quality can go up significantly. And I think the interesting thing is when I got the AirPods Pro 2, I saw like a comment on a review or something that says, if you think this sounds great, get this $35 IEM. And it was the Kiwi Ears Credenza, I believe. And I remember thinking there's no way like a $35 IEM is going to sound better than this like $200+ like Apple product. And I was like proven wrong. Like the thing that I ended up realizing was because of a lot of the kind of more well-known like kind of earphones and IEMs like the AirPods Pro and whatnot, they tend to have a more V-shaped sound signature. And you end up losing a lot of details in the mids. And so I think what was so eye-opening to me was that $35 earphone was because it was a different sound signature. It was a lot more like warm, a little bit more balanced to warm sound signature. I was able to pick out details that I just couldn't hear due to the sound signature of the kind of AirPods Pro 2. And that's when I just started kind of uncovering more about like the audiophile community and like also more about how there are these different sound signatures that are going to elevate certain experiences and different types of music than just only sticking with one like, V-shaped, earphones that you may have had that which I'd say most of people may be used to in a lot of consumer audio.
So I noticed I did a little research on you. I tried to find some information out online before we spoke, and I know that you're in the tech industry in Seattle, and you're a manager, and you are, I would guess, it seems to me, a very naturally curious person. You're also probably a very driven person. In your quest for better and better audio products, as you discovered that the Kiwi Ears Cadenza might sound better than the AirPods Pro, where are you now in your journey?
That's a really great question, and I think that's a really like spot on assessment of I'm the type of person where when I get like really curious about a hobby, I like get like super like hyper focused.
Yeah, me too.
Like, to be honest, I've only been in the hobby for a bit over a year now, but I just spent so much time with it that in my journey, I'm kind of reaching more towards like knowing exactly the types of sound signatures I like. And I also think it kind of varies on the song and then even my mood and what I'm trying to feel, what I'm feeling that day. So like, for example, I think I'm at the point in my journey where I'm looking more towards, you may hear in the community, like those end game sets, where it's usually at that point where you understand your likes and dislikes. You understand that also the value and versatility where you don't necessarily want just to stick with one IEM, but you may realize, okay, for these sets of songs, I'm going to use this IEM. And you almost have like a rotation is where you get to that point. And so I think I'm definitely in that part of my journey. But I still think I have ways to go in terms of being able to kind of more quickly pick out some of the differences when you A/B different IEMs. So I think sometimes it takes me a little bit longer. I have to like re-listen to a part in a song to be able to quickly say, okay, that was the difference of these IEMs without looking at like the frequency chart for these IEMs.
You spent a lot of time, so we met at CanJam in Dallas just recently, and you spent quite a bit of time at the Linsole booth where I was trying just a few sets, and you really were very, very methodical and focused in your listening, and I'm assuming in your assessment. What I would say at all of CanJam, what really stood out? What were you listening for? What were you hoping to find everywhere? And then did you find it? And what stood out to you?
So the first one, I'd say the one that stood out the most to me was the Audio Origin, just because it was so fun. Because I think at the end of the day, you get to remember you're doing this hobby out of fun, right? Like if you've lost the fun, then what's the point of the hobby? And it genuinely had so much fun in the sense that it was a very engaging bass, which works well in my playlist, which I tend to listen to a lot more of like the K-pop type genre. And at the same time, because I do care about vocals, that was super important to me, that the vocals still need to feel very present. And it did that job really, really well. So it was a very engaging IEM, and I think it stood out the most because it was the most fun. It may not have been the most detailed IEM. It may not have necessarily been the IEM with the best like layering and separation, but it had the most fun. And so I think from a hobby perspective, that definitely drew me towards the IEM the most. Another IEM I think that stood out was also from Theaudio, which was the Theaudio Prestige LTD. The reason that stood out to me was that it had this like very refined sound to it, and it almost felt like really sophisticated. Like it almost felt like I was an audio engineer, and like this is how the music would like supposed to be sound and how ideally it should sound. Without being, too boring, I guess, in the sense. So it fit that balance of being more true to the sound without being too boring, like a reference IEM. And so I think that was why I was like, wow, I definitely felt like more sophisticated or cultured, if that makes sense, just listening to that IEM. And so That kind of stood out. And I think the other thing that, factors into some of this of standing out is to the price point of like, it's amazing to think that some of these IEMs that sound like this were impressing me than IEMs that were like 3 or 4 times the price. And I'll use the example of the Origin to me, it reminded me of a slightly cheaper Canera Low-Key. which was an IEM that I had like absolutely loved, and I thought it's about $3,000 or something.
And that also has a bone conduction. Is that a bone conduction driver?
It also has a bone conduction driver. I may even have multiple, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh.
I don't remember the exact configuration, but it does have multiple different driver technologies and the bone conduction driver as well. And I just remember thinking like, whoa, and I A-B'd them actually at the Bloom Audio. So I also spent a lot of time at the Bloom Audio booth, and I was A-B'ing them. And obviously you can hear the differences, but it wasn't to the point that justified paying like 3 times more the price.
Right.
So I think that's something where I do find very like interesting about coming to these conferences. And in terms of answering the second part of the question of what's my process for testing, so I usually do a mixture of 2 things. So first I look at what are the songs that I actually listen to, and I think that is the most important part. I know that sometimes people look up, hey, what are good tracks to go test music to? And I'd say the issue with that is that if you don't listen to that type of music often, you're not necessarily evaluating it for the types of music that you are going to be enjoying most. So it makes sense to test the songs that are on your repeat a lot. And so I tend to listen more to the songs that I know extremely well and kind of see how it may bring new life to those songs. And so that's one part of the process that I do. And then usually after I do that, depending on if I'm not too fatigued, because sometimes it's a very serious thing of like the earphone fatigue that you get after like these conferences. But if I'm not too fatigued, I go into my, these are not necessarily songs I listen to a lot, but I know these are good songs for testing earphones. And that's when I play those set of songs. So I always try to play the songs that I find like I will listen to the most first. And if I'm curious about those more of like, okay, these are the songs that people say are great to test with, I will play those usually second after that if I still find that IEM interesting. If I don't, I may move on to a different IEM.
I struggle with this a little bit, being in the industry and having a lot of IEMs to choose from and generally a lot of gear is I find that I spend sometimes a little too much time actually thinking about how an IEM sounds and less time immersing myself in the music. Is that something that ever happens to you? Or do you find that, once you've found that perfect IEM, like, do you have a hard time disconnecting from the gear and sinking into the music?
I could definitely say there are points where, like, especially being a techie, where, you get really involved in the gear and you're like, whoa, there's this new driver, or, oh, I haven't tried an Iem that was like an all BA set with like 10 plus drivers. Like you can get a little geek out about the gear.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of, at least in my experience, it's definitely happened. But I would say I try to make sure, like, one of the things, and I didn't mention it earlier, of how I evaluate, I look at musicality a lot, like, which I know that's not a very like objective way of measuring, but I do kind of look at musicality of, do I feel immersed in this sound? Do I feel like, am I too overwhelmed by the details? Because sometimes I've tried really, really resolving very detailed IEMs, and I won't mention names, but I got a headache, and I felt like the details were actually like overwhelming me. Especially as I mentioned, I'm a bit on the treble sensitive side. So some of the very resolving bright IEMs did cause me to get some headaches. And so it's like, that's not going to be enjoyable. So I do kind of try to make sure I'm still remembering why I'm in this hobby, which is ultimately for the music, right? Really enjoying that music.
Yeah.
And so I'd say that's definitely something I try to make sure I remind myself.
I think that's important. I have a pair of, it's the Sony IER M9s, which I call my like pajama IEMs because they're just so smooth and velvety. And it's a set that I'll use maybe late night jazz, it's sort of a mellow, darker set. It's just a little polished and velvety. And I love them because they don't have that sort of bright, in your face presentation. But then sometimes I'll want a set that just, is brash and bold and throw something else in to give me that. And it is, I think, like you said, it's just fun to realize that maybe there isn't one set to rule them all. One thing that you told me at CanJam, and maybe someone else had told you this, but you came back to the booth and said, I want to try the Origin again with classical music because...
Oh, yeah.
Which is, I think people don't think about, a fun, as you described it, bone conduction driver, IEM, as something that you might listen to classical music with. Tell me about that experience for you.
Yeah, so actually, one of the a separate attendee at CanJam was telling me, hey, this is going to sound crazy, but go and try orchestral music with the Origin. And I was like, really? Like, I was only testing like things like, that had like an engaging bass and was more like, fun, like more centered around fun. And I went and I tried like the Nutcracker. I forget which song within the Nutcracker album. It sounded like amazing. Like it felt like I was there, like in just around like a symphony or orchestra, and like you can hear because I think because it is a bassy set, like you can hear the timpani and like the different, like especially like the drum instruments, like it go very deep, I guess, into the music. And so I think it just ended up making you feel a lot more immersed, almost as if you were there like sitting around an orchestra.
Maybe one of the fun things about the Nutcracker is, for any of us who have seen it, you can almost close your eyes and just imagine what's happening in front of you when you're hearing
exactly
one of the pieces. Yeah, that's so fun.
That was one of the first, like the exact experience you're describing was one of the first things that really wowed me about just like IEMs in general, of like getting a good quality one, of it just, you really feel like you're almost at a concert sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's a very for a lot of especially for folks that transitioned that weren't necessarily not like an audiophile, that kind of more early into their audiophile journey, like that is like a very like priceless feeling of like learning that. And I hadn't experienced that before when I didn't have this gear. And one thing I'll add to that is that I love showing some of these IEMs to my friends because I see them have that experience, like that same experience that I have, where they're like, whoa, I like never knew that was in the song, or whoa, I feel like the artist is like singing right in front of me. That sort of thing, I think what makes the hobby so unique.
Yeah, it really can be a transformative experience the first time you try an IEM. I love that. So, you were one of few women at the CanJam Dallas, and I've been to a bunch of CanJams, and there just aren't a lot of women that attend. What's that like for you to be one of the few females that are trying different products and walking around? It's really a kind of a guy's world, it seems like.
No, and it's definitely where there's not as many women present in the conferences. And so just for context, so I've been to the Singapore CanJam that was back in April.
Oh, cool.
So I have family in Singapore, so it was a kind of, feed two birds with one scone of getting to see my family and then also getting to like go. That was my very first earphone conference. And there was actually more women at that one. So I do think maybe in Asia, it's a bit more like not as gendered of a hobby. Obviously, there were still mostly males, but a little bit more women than the Dallas one. And then the Dallas one, exactly what you said of, I was one of the very few women there. But I did get to meet some other women that were at that conference and becoming friends with them. But I would say in terms of what it's like, I'm definitely no stranger to that. So I was in a major, so I majored in electrical and computer engineering. And that was a major that like you definitely go in a room and there's like, you're like looking and they're like, wow, I'm just like the only girl that may have entered this room. And so I'm no stranger to that. But I would definitely say I do feel like everyone made a really strong effort to kind of make me feel involved. Like I never felt like there was any sort of toxicity at those conferences. And even, for example, at the Singapore one, I was talking to someone there, and he ended up being one of the organizers. And we were talking for a while, and he said, "Oh, wait, you flew all the way from the US for this?" And he went, and they had these like little jerseys that they were giving out at the booth. You had to pay for it to get at the booth. And he's like, "Let me just go get you one of these jerseys for free for coming all this way." And so it's just like a very kind of welcoming thing. I do feel like everyone has been extremely welcoming, that it's not been an issue to me in terms of the conferences. Definitely, I would say more on, if you look at the kind of some of the YouTube channels of some of the popular audiophiles, that one definitely, you can definitely say it's more of a boys club of it. Yeah. Of like some of the jokes are a little bit more like catered towards males a bit. But I would say overall, I think that I hope to see more women in the hobby. And I don't see this as a hobby that has any reason to be gendered.
Yeah.
The thing that I find very interesting about this hobby is that I was actually surprised how niche that the hobby seems to be. Because at the same time, so many people love music. Like, so many people, you read, like, maybe they have like a bio about themselves, they may mention they're a music lover, or they love going to concerts and all of that. And I feel like that exact type of person should be the best person to be exposed to like IEMs or kind of hi-fi audio, because they're gonna get those like experiences more, just like a lot more higher quality than like what they may have been using with like the Apple, earphones or whatnot.
I absolutely agree, and I'm counting on you to be an advocate to other women in the hobby and get more people into it, get more women into it, so they can really just experience the tremendous sound quality and immersive experience that you can get from an IEM that you really don't get from AirPods or other maybe less hi-fi sources. If you had, let's say you had an unlimited budget, you went to a CanJam and you could you had your fantasy like setup. Is it like one amazing thing, or is it like 10, or give it to me?
Yeah, so it's funny because my answer has changed after I went to CanJam Dallas, but my answer before CanJam Dallas is like, I would just pick the low key and get like a really good like DAP with it, like maybe like a one of those fancy Astern and Kern DAPs. That would have been my answer before, but now it's really interesting because like I think after getting to experience like the Origin is like I didn't feel as much of a need to go spend like that much money to go do it. So I'd say, but yeah, if to the question of what is kind of then the ideal setup, I would actually go for more variety of like IEMs with more unique colored sound signatures, and just being able to have that variety and just being able to kind of try out different IEMs to like different songs. And almost like finding like a different set of IEMs that work with all of my like favorite songs and figuring out which one plays them best type thing. Because I do have like a playlist where it's like, the playlist is called Repeat, and they're the songs that I play the most. And so maybe like identifying like the perfect IEM for each of those songs, that would be like my kind of dream setup, I guess.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I'm pretty fickle and just curious, and I don't think I'd be happy with one set. One thing that I do think when you start spending a lot of money, really a lot of money on IEMs, you get, I think generally there are two things. You get exclusivity, and there is something sort of fun about saying, I have this thing that most people have heard of but don't own, like the Subtonic Storm or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't even heard it. But just knowing, if someone who owns that, like, wow, that's special. And then I don't really know what to call it, but it's this like, what I say is like, I don't know what it is, but I want it. When something just feels so good and premium, it's like you haven't even listened to it, but like from the packaging to the presentation, and it just makes you feel good to to own it, to put it in your ear, or the DAC or the DAP is like just machined really beautifully, and everything is just heavy and precise. Like there's something that would probably be that's the area that I would lean towards if I had an unlimited budget. But I'm kind of with you, I don't, and I'd rather just spend more money on things that are really good, but also affordable in my price range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I think realistically, I think good value for money, because like you said, you hit diminishing returns. Like I did in the Singapore CanJam, I did try the Subatomic Storm.
Oh.
And I would say that it definitely did. Like, I feel like it's the type of IEM where it plays any song really well. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that's what it was really going for, is that it's meant to be like the one to kind of destroy all type IEMs. But that being said, like you still wouldn't get that versatility, right?
Right.
Like you would still not get the ability to go try that newness of different IEMs.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I don't think I would ever like spend money to buy a one to kind of rule them all type IEMs.
It's like the best chocolate ice cream ever, but it's still just chocolate ice cream.
Exactly. Exactly.
Sujata, thank you so much for speaking with me about IEMs and music and all the stuff we talked about. It's been really informative, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at another CanJam down the road, and here we can compare notes on what we like and what we don't like and what we've learned since this conversation.
Yeah, and thank you, James, for inviting me for this interview, and also just for the awesome time we had at CanJam. Like I think it was really good talking to you about like your different experiences that you've had, both as an audiophile and also in like kind of the like sound industry, audio industry, and also hope to see you at kind of future CanJams. Maybe either the New York one or Dallas again next year.
Well, if you come to New York in 2025, Joyce, who is a reviewer from China, also affiliated with Linsol, she is going to be at CanJam New York City, I'm pretty sure. It's
really awesome to have more women in the audiophile community, especially those that are gaining kind of more of a following around kind of the reviews, because she does a great job with them. So yeah, I'm excited to go to CanJam and hopefully see you both there.
I hope so too. All right. Well, until next time, we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much, James. Bye.
This video is brought to you by Linsol.com. Linsol sells IEMs, headphones, amplifiers, digital to analog converters, cables, really just about anything you could want for personal hi-fi or even home hi-fi. Their prices are great, the quality is exceptional, and their customer service is really second to none. Check them out in the link below.